Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. Just a couple more questions about FVAS, and these are more forward-looking questions as distinct from what we're doing right now. Grand Chief Malloway, what discussions have you had, or what thoughts are there around a joint monitoring program? And could you explain what those words typically mean to you and what your thinking around that is?
We have had some discussions with folks about joint monitoring, and we have in the past we did monitor the sport fishery 1 year. The sport fisheries wanted to go out and catch sockeye, but DFO said we don't have any monitoring program in place. We don't, we can't do it, and so they came to us and they asked us if we would monitor it, and we said, yeah, we'll monitor it. So we monitored the sport fishery for that 1 year. It was pretty good. We were a little bit tentative about it because of the relationship being a bit rocky, but 99% of the sporties were quite cooperative, and we had a really good season. And it was only a 1 year deal, though. It never happened again. I'm not too sure why we offered. We've also offered to do some monitoring in Area 29, Area 8. That there was serious discussions about that happening, but it hasn't happened yet.
What about expansions? Commissioner Cohen has heard discussions around the need for improvement of monitoring or development of monitoring for things like environmental situations or habitat or any of the other broader obligations around the fisheries. Has there been any consideration around expanding the work of the FVAS monitors to more broadly consider the other areas of monitoring that need to happen in addition to how many fish people have caught?
Well, in the past, the Lower Fraser Fisheries Authority, when it was in place, had 18 fishery officers, and that was something that we were looking at. We were looking at the monitors and the fishery officers expanding into other areas, environmental areas and wildlife areas. We were looking at them doing work like that, but the Aboriginal Fishery Officer program was cancelled, and we haven't been able to get it back since.
And do you see that as something that would provide some assistance and overall benefits in the Lower Fraser? And do you see that as something that could provide some efficiencies in funding and otherwise?
I think so. There's a very limited amount of fishery officers in the valley, and it's quite a big territory for them to cover. And we do see things that they might not see. For instance, there's a dump near the river in Chilliwack, and one of the band members near there phoned me and said there's some black stuff going into the water. Can you come down and look? And I went down and took pictures, and I brought the pictures to DFO, and DFO said we don't do anything with these, but we'll turn them over to Environment Canada. And Environment Canada was going to do an investigation, but I hadn't heard anything since.
And Mr. Madsen, would you like to comment on this about, from a DFO's perspective, going into the future and looking at reducing budgets that we've all heard about, and the need to, the ever-increasing monitoring around habitat and otherwise that sustainable fisheries require? Has DFO begun to look at how these types of monitoring programs can expand into the future to create better synergies of work?
I'd like to provide an observation first, and that is that the skills that the FVAS monitors have, particularly in data management and so forth, are transportable skills and could be well applied to monitoring of the environment and other similar kinds of technical jobs. The other observation, though, is that whilst I agree that it could be an area of future opportunity, in terms of expanded monitoring direction. It's not necessarily the Department of Fisheries mandate or an area where we have staff employed. As Ken said, there's Department of Environment and local municipalities, regional districts and so forth have environmental monitors. Increasingly, it's more at a local government level. Notwithstanding that, I think that there is some opportunity there. And to answer your question specifically about have we examined that, in terms of capacity development, yes. In terms of trying to, well, let me rephrase that. There has been efforts to try to employ some of the technical folks in hatcheries and so on. But again, the opportunities have been limited and far between.
So this would require collaboration with other departments within Canada and with the province and otherwise, but that the skill sets are available and you see it possible.
I totally agree.
Okay. All right, turning now more broadly to the entire panel. I just have a couple of questions. We've heard both about the ISDF and the Fraser River Salmon Table. Could perhaps, Mr. Masson, if you could start with this, and if the others on the panel have something to add. Do you see these two types of processes as complementary? As I understand it, the ISDF is a much more provincial and general thing, and the Fraser Salmon Table is much more local on the river in the lower mainland. How do you see them complementary, and do you see them as overlapping or duplicative?
No, I don't see them as duplicating. And I previously had mentioned the kind of high beam, low beam approach from the Monitoring Compliance Panel. And as you point out, the Salmon Table has a more localized focus. And has some specific mandates, and I'm not really qualified to go into details around that. The Monitoring Compliance Panel and the Salmon Table did effectively collaborate, work together on a project in the lower river, and certainly not a duplication. I think it's just another example of where a collaborative process seems to be both appropriate and generated some clear benefits.
Do any of the other panel members have anything to add to that?
Yeah, there's a lot of the same folks in both places that are sort of, not a lot, but involved in the Salmon Table as well. The Salmon Table is somewhat of a creature of originally of the Commercial Salmon Advisory Board. Sort of started there, went back and forth, and I sit on the monitoring panel, a member of that. Ken's a member of the Salmon Table, and it's a local process, but nevertheless, I think it overlaps quite nicely with the other ones.
Grand Chief Melloway?
I'm on the Salmon Table and the Monitoring Compliance Panel, and one of the many hats I wear. And the Fraser Salmon Table initially was put together to try to rebuild Cultus Lake sockeye stocks, but we started to work on other areas as well, and work with other folks as well. We've met with Secwepemc, the Shuswap people. We've met with folks up in the Chilcotin area as well. Talk about possible work and partnerships in their areas as well. So it is a kind of a watershed group.
Just picking up on that watershed, Mr. Besson, do you have any comments about the difference in capacity amongst, if you start in the, I know you have familiarity on in the Vancouver Island and into the Fraser River and up. There are a lot of capacity issues, a number of which you've mentioned. Would you agree with me that there are different levels of capacity amongst First Nations if you start, for example, at the Douglas Treaty Group and move into the Fraser and all the way up, and that difference in capacity is something that will need to be considered? If you agree that there is a difference in capacity, that difference of capacity will need to be considered as we move forward on the information management issues that you referred to?
Absolutely, I agree.
And how do you think the department is going to address those? As I understand it, most of the funding is now going through an AFS programs, some is through AROM, but those are pretty accounted for dollars as I understand it. Are we going to need to be looking for additional dollars for First Nations to be developing the capacity necessary for the information management systems that you're looking for?
Yes, I think that's the case. I also think that a great deal of mileage can be made by discussing the direction of the resources that are in place currently. A lot of the resources contribute to staff time, and so it's the direction of that And providing catalysts is often a key to working cost effectively. So it might be that capacity development can be achieved by working with the First Nations in every situation and together finding ways to secure the right catalyst to move forward to get the capacity built and moving ahead. But I also acknowledge the point that at the end of the day, building capacity takes resources.
Takes resources and time, would you agree?
Time, I would definitely agree.
And specific understandings of the local situations of those First Nations?
Yes.
Mr. Commissioner, I just want to call attention to Colin Masson's resume on this. Mr. Masson, you have spent a fair bit of time before you started doing the work on catch and monitoring, working directly with First Nations, both on the Vancouver Island and in the Lower Fraser. That's correct?
That's correct.
I just want to turn to the document 19 on the First Nations Coalition's list. This is a document resulting from the Lower Fraser Salmon Fisheries Fraser River Salmon Table 2010. Grand Chief Malloway and Mr. Masson, I understand you attended the workshop that's reported here. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Yes.
And I'd like to turn to page 12. Oh, sorry, I have to go to Exhibit 850. I'm wondering, have you reviewed this? Does this reflect the kinds of challenges and discussions that had at the Visions workshop oh, sorry, it wasn't Visions, the Fraser River Salmon Table in 2010? Sure.
Yeah. Yes, I recall this document, and it reflected the workshop that followed the field trip.
I'm wondering if I could have this marked as an exhibit.
Exhibit 859.
And now I need to turn to Exhibit 850. This is my mistake, which is another report from the Fraser Salmon Table. This was the 2009 report, and I want to go to page 12 of that exhibit. And this is in which they list 3 fundamentals for moving the relationship, particularly around catch monitoring and accounting, forward. And you'll see there are 3 particular bullets on that page. True. Under trust, decision making, and values. Would Mr. Masson, Mr. Sakich, and Mr. Malloway, do you agree that these are the kinds of matters that we have to look at when looking at moving forward in the relationship around catch monitoring? We've had a lot of discussion so far about number 1. Would you also agree with number 2 and 3?
Yes, I do. I'm glad to see somebody's got traceability in here.
All right, Mr. Masson?
Yeah, I agree.
Mr. Malloway?
Yes, I agree.
What is traceability? Perhaps I'll ask Mr. Masson that question.
Traceability is the ability to track product from the time of harvest through to the consumer.
And that's part of the work that you're doing under some PICFI funding?
It is. We have a traceability objective there.
And have you been working with Chehalis with respect to some traceability issues?
That is correct.
And has that been
the salmon table as well.
Thank you. And turning now to item number 2 on that list, and improving decision-making at levels, I'm curious, what is the vision or the plan when looking at assessing each of the fisheries for the types of catch monitoring that needs to be done, given your structured framework, as to who will be involved in doing that assessment and who will be involved in making decisions as to the appropriate catch monitoring levels that will be required in the different fisheries? And I'll start again with you, Mr. Masson.
The question is who would be
who
involved?
And how would you make what's the vision for who and how implementing that framework will occur?
Clearly, the discussion has to involve the harvesters. Harvesters know their fishery intimately and have a great deal to contribute in terms of information and support. The involvement of others with an interest can often be a key factor, and certainly the department in their interaction with harvesters play a role.
Yes, I agree. As far as the people with the interest, we always make sure that we include NGOs in our deliberations.
Mr. Sakic, do you have any comments as to who and how this is going to be done?
Well, I think there's a lot of things went through the Integrated Salmon Dialogue Forum, and one was when they were doing the guidebook, and the Chinook was just being an example, and basically I think it would apply to this, and that you basically had to follow that fish right from the ocean right through to the spawning beds to pretty well keep track of who was all going to be involved in talking about it.
So it sounds like you have a goal of trying to reach some type of consensus or understanding amongst the harvesters, Mr. Masson. What happens if you don't, and how long will it take to get there?
I'm not sure I can answer all the questions. So in reaching a goal with respect to fisheries monitoring programs, I'll try to contextualize the answer a little bit. So the intent is to involve the harvesters, particularly, and others with an interest at play in the discussions about what's required and the rationale for that, what kind of programs are appropriate, what are the roles and responsibilities in implementing those programs, who's going to pay, and how else can it be supported to implement it successfully. So at the end of the day, if there's not an agreement to proceed with the program because it's not affordable, then the department has a responsibility, and as we outline in our framework, to go back and revisit what kind of risks are at play, given the fact that there may be insufficient information to satisfy or address that risk. And there's other alternatives can be considered. Changes in how the fishery is conducted, changes in the management regime, other kinds of ways of addressing risk need to be considered. Ultimately, however, the Department of Fisheries does have a mandate to authorize fisheries, and if it considers that the fishery is at a sufficient risk that it shouldn't take place, then the fishery might not be authorized, and alternatives could be examined.
All right. In the last 10 minutes of my time, Mr. Masson, I'd like to take you to tab 11 of the First Nations Coalition's documents. And in particular, this is a document I believe it's referred to in paragraphs 103 to 198 of the Policy and Practice Report. It's 11A. We'll start with that. And I understand Mr. Taylor took you to this earlier. This is the report that you were speaking of earlier that you and David Lightly authored in November of 2009. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
But I have this marked as the next exhibit. And this was a document that was provided to the RDG with a briefing note. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And
yes, that's correct.
And if I could have document 11.
861.
That's the briefing note, Mr. Masson.
Yeah.
And you were partly an author of that briefing note. Is that correct?
Yeah, that would be correct.
And you'll agree with me that the two issues in that briefing note and that you spoke about specifically and much longer in the report is incentives to monitor and report and the importance of collaboration.
That's correct.
And one of the key things you speak about in the report, and this is at page 7 if you need to see it, as an author you may not need to go directly to that, you talk about positive incentives as distinct from negative incentives. What are you talking about there, and can you give some specifics as to the types of positive incentives that you believe the Department of Fisheries and Oceans should be considering when looking at collaborative catch monitoring working relationships with First Nations?
Positive incentives around fishery monitoring focus on understanding and appreciating and supporting the benefits from effective catch monitoring. And in one of the earlier documents we were looking at this morning, there was a slide that tried to list those in a summary fashion from a First Nations perspective. And it's all around trying to address some of the concerns that have become apparent to myself and Mr. Lightly, the co-author as well, about some reluctance from First Nations to participate, given concern about what the numbers might be used for, and a lack of appreciation of the contribution of the information to fisheries management and the successful implementation of their own fisheries. So positive incentives in this context is largely around trying to ensure successful fishing opportunities and successful participation in the management process.
So collaborative management, it could be considered, or steps towards collaborative management that are concrete and felt could easily be considered a positive incentive from your perspective?
From my perspective, that's very true.
And from your experience, would you agree that that would open the doors in many different ways with First Nations?
I would certainly agree.
And if I could turn your attention specifically to page 13 of that document, the third paragraph under the title, page 13 of the report, third paragraph, and in this paragraph, you're talking about respectful communication and recognizing the responsibilities of the various parties. You just review that. I don't want to read the whole paragraph aloud or take the time of that, but you'll see at the end of it, you conclude by avoiding the elephant in the room. And I'd like you to speak specifically about what you mean by the elephant in the room and the challenges associated with it.
What's being referenced here is a challenge in discussion with First Nation organizations and departmental staff. In many situations, an underlying and fundamental concern that I've begun to appreciate from First Nations is their concern about rights and title and jurisdiction. And these are issues that the Department of Fisheries doesn't have the authority or the mandate to define and so forth. So quite often the department ends up not wanting to discuss them at all, not even wanting them on the agenda. And this makes it very difficult in discussions with First Nations to kind of get beyond that and talk about the matter at hand and talk about ways we can collaborate together. And so when we talk about the elephant in the room, it's this issue that we have no mandate to deal with, no mandate to resolve. It's a much broader issue than we can possibly address. But what we were suggesting in this paper was, at the very least, we should allow it airtime, acknowledge that it exists, and then move on.
And Grand Chief Malloway, has it been your experience in your own direct relationships with the Department of Fisheries and Oceans and in all your work with First Nations that this is truly an elephant in the room?
Yes.
Why is it that the department, from your perspective, Mr. Masson, feels that they can't deal with rights and title issues?
It's because it's not our mandate to define them or deal with those issues. So whilst we recognize that rights are confirmed in the Constitution and so forth, it's not our business to define them.
I would like to turn next. Did I mark these as exhibits, both of them? Yes. Could I then turn to First Nations document number 12? And Mr. Masson, you recognize this email exchange?
Yes, I do.
And this is an email exchange regarding the draft version of this report, is that correct?
That is correct.
I have this marked as the next exhibit.
862.
And what I mean by this report, the report that we were just talking about that you and Mr. Lightbody co-authored?
That's correct. And as you pointed out, we are referencing in this email exchange a draft version of it.
Now, Karina McGivney is in what position?
At that point, I think she was the either acting or the regional director for Treaty and Aboriginal Affairs.
And she's in that position now?
No, currently I believe she works in the enhancement branch, Habitat and Enhancement.
Specifically, as I understand this email, she had scanned the report quickly and asked that you pull out specific parts of the report, particularly those relating to constitutionally protected communal rights of First Nations and commitments to collaborative relationships with First Nations. Have I read that email correctly?
I think that's correct if we were to look at the subsequent sections, yes.
And your response to Ms. Karina at the first of it, could you explain to the Commissioner what challenges you were facing at the time in which you got the comments and how you felt about that and how you tried to resolve it?
Well, at the time I was concerned that perhaps the point that we were trying to make in this document about the importance of collaboration and a collaborative approach with interactions with First Nations was being missed. And so that was the intent of my feedback.
And from your experience within the Department of Fishery and Oceans, why would those concepts within a catch monitoring report be frightening to the to the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, or at least be of some concern that they would be deleted?
I can't necessarily speak to the full thoughts that Karina might have had at the time. There is another aspect as well that part of the feedback was trying to edit the document and make it more concise. And so part of the feedback was, what we said in a page and a half, perhaps it could be more tightly worded as well. And I think also there was concerns about the aspect of raising the discussion and trying to ensure that the department wasn't taking on responsibility for discussions about rights and title.
Chief Malloway, from your perspective, what's needed for co-management as it relates to catch monitoring going forward? Or collaborative management, I understand you prefer that term now.
Well, we need to be on the same page. One of the things when I was looking at one of the documents that we spoke about earlier about the strategic framework, there's a lot of information in there and philosophy, but not enough detail. Like there needs to be more detail. We need to know what we're agreeing to. We want to know what the department means when they're talking about the monitoring program. And some of the documents that we've seen today talk about there's a need for more better monitoring in many sectors. None of the documents that I've seen today or in the binder that I got refer to the Fraser Valley monitoring because I don't think you can get much better than that. So we would like to know what exactly what it is that DFO is going to do. If they're going to do something differently, I don't know if there's any way to improve the monitoring that's done in our area, or we'd like to know what they're going to do, overall.
I believe that I've used up my time, Mr. Commissioner, so I'll have to sit down and leave it for the others in the room. Thank you. Thank you, panel members.
Commissioner Boris Tazek for the province of British Columbia. I'm going to, we spent a lot of time dealing with more of the detail of the monitoring and compliance panel. Most of the focus of my questions are going to step back and look at the ISDF process, the Integrated Salmon Dialogue Forum as a whole. Now, I know, Mr. Sakic, you were involved right from the start in that process. Were you not?
Yes, that's right.
And Grand Chief Malloway?
Yes, that's right.
And Mr. Masson?
Sure. Yes. Yes, indeed.
Okay. Thank you. I'd like you to, Mr. Lunn, if we could, to go to the PPR to page, paragraph 88. Just to sort of get some context and background here, I just want to read some of the sentences here and ask for your views on it. Paragraph 88 starts like this. The Integrated Salmon Dialogue Forum is a collaborative and inclusive opportunity for all interests to work together towards a fully integrated, sustainable salmon fishery where the participants have agreed to make best efforts to work through their respective processes, agencies, and organizations to give effect to any consensus reached in the forum and to address any differences that emerge. Is that your understanding of what it was trying to do?
That's right.
Mr. Masson?
Yes, I agree.
Grand Chief Malloway?
Yes.
Thank you. According to the ISDF, its mandate is set by the participants to the forum and not by DFO or any other authority. Mr. Sakic?
That's right. When you talk about reaching consensus, well, you had consensus to form a monitoring panel. You had consensus to, I forget what the three original things are because the names have changed, but when we first did all three, there was consensus in the forum to form those three. What they did after is another step.
Mr. Masson?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that captures it well.
Grand Chief Malloway?
Yes.
Thank you. And just to note, Commissioner, there was some evidence on this and the purpose of the ISDF on February 3rd, 2001, at pages 91 to 97, and Exhibit 392, which was an initial document called the Framework of the Integrated Salmon Dialogue Forum, was entered. Now, if we go to the next paragraph, getting some more background on the ISDF. The ISDF hosts meetings which are intended to be a comfortable and safe space for often difficult conversations to develop information, share goals and interests, understand differences, and identify common ground that may be helpful to take back discussions within sector-based organizations and processes. Is that your experience of it?
It is.
Mr. Sackage? Mr. Masson?
Yes, and I'd also add a comment that our regional director general at the time said, and that was, he explained that there are some of these issues the Department of Fisheries cannot do alone. We can only do it by working with those that are affected.
Grand Chief Malloway?
Yes, I think I think you should understand where this originally came from. In 2006, when I was on the Fraser panel, and Mike Griswold was also on the Fraser panel, a commercial fisherman came to me and he said, if the fishery goes ahead as planned, the exploitation rate on Collis Lake sockeye at 10 to 12%, it's going to virtually wipe out our fishery. Is there any way we could move the number, the exploitation rate up to over 20%? And who would we talk to? And I said, well, you should talk to the Stalo people and the Sawali people. And so we had, I said, just invite us to a meeting. And so they did. We went to meet down at CSAB. Over this period of about 2.5 weeks, we had about a dozen meetings. And we had, at first it was just a handful of us, and then other people started coming in, NGOs started coming in, First Nations from upriver started coming in, others started attending, and we ended up with a memorandum of understanding, and basically it was an agreement that we would agree to the level of exploitation rate going up to about 25% from 10 to 12%. In return, CSAB would catch 100,000 sockeye, and they would sell them, and then the money would be put in trust, and we would start a process to rebuild the Collis Lake sockeye. And we brought that memorandum of understanding to Department of Fisheries and Oceans, and we said, this is a document that we've worked out. This is we've come to an agreement, and we would like this to be implemented. Some of the middle management folks were kind of upset with us for leaving DFO out of the process, but Paul Sprout seemed to like it, and then it wasn't long before the Integrated Salmon Dialogue Forum started to come together, and he invited the people that were key players in that process to be members of the ISDF.
Thank you. Now, this paragraph goes on to say, in this way, the forum, that is the ISDF, incubates, not implements ideas. And is the process here, this is a place for discussions to take place. Mr. Sackage.
Yes, that's right. It's not a policy forum. Let's put it that way. I think that would sum it up. In fact, we've had lots of discussions around that. We're not exactly fussy about the policy word itself.
Mr. Masson.
Yeah, I think the statement is self-explanatory. It's useful for the. It reflects the way that the ISDF has operated as well.
Grand Chief Malloway.
Yes, I agree with the statement.
Yeah, and the part that deals with participation, Grand Chief Malloway, you brought it up a bit. Participation in the forum is voluntary. It doesn't involve a formal system of representative membership. Now, A, is that the case? And B, has that been an effective way for this sort of a process to work? Grand Chief Malloway.
Yes, I believe it is effective. earlier, I mentioned that when the meetings first started happening, it was by invitation only, but some other folks developed an interest in it and started to show up and started to attend the meetings. So, and they weren't turned away; they were included. And I think it helped the process by having more diversity.
Mr. Masson?
Yeah, I would kind of put this both ways. Voluntary participation is a key element in this process. At the same time, it presents challenges because some of the interests want to be they want their participation there to be more structured. They want to have absolute clear representation. They want the process to be mandated and then to understand how it's going to make decisions. So this is a different kind of forum. And so thus it operates differently. And it's challenging for some groups and individuals to appreciate the difference and the value of it.
Mr. Sakich?
It's kind of give you an example to that. It is to inform it. It gets an awful lot of interesting people around there. And at the last Integrated Salmon Dialogue Forum meeting we had, it was one of the kind of the leaders in the Area B in the Seine Boat group says that, you know, it's really too bad that industry didn't pay more attention to this, that we're not engaged in it. Because I think it took a while and then they started to see the value in the process. There was always a few attending and they never remarked about it that way in the first part, but towards the end when they could see that maybe the door is going to close on it, immediately got a bit of concern of where else are you going to have these sort of discussions.
M&C panel and the document charting our course, which has been discussed today, the ISDF is also produced some other documents which we'd just like to put before the Commission. Mr. Lund, if you could bring up BC document number 3. Mr. Sakich, is this a document that you're familiar with?
I would say so, yeah. Seen them all.
You've seen them all?
Yeah, I did. There's different groups and different projects in there, so you're not as intimate with some as you are with others, depending where you're spending your time.
Now, I just this one here it's on page 3. It indicates what the purpose of it is, but there's one statement in the box here. So, Mr. Lund, if we could go to page 3. In the second box, yes, if you want to highlight that. And the second sentence of that box, which says, the tools are intended as instruments to help build and support relationships, for it is relationships among people and organization and across sectors and scales that are the engine that drives better processes. Is that a comment that you would agree with, Mr. Sakich?
Yes, I do. As it was said in there once, this is not about managing fish, it's about managing people.
Mr. Masson?
I totally agree.
Grand Chief Malloy?
Yeah, I agree.
Okay. May I have this marked as the next exhibit, please?
Exhibit 863.
And now if we could go to document 4 on BC's list, please, Mr. Lund. This is another document. Mr. Sakich, I believe you are familiar with this?
Yes?
And again, here, I don't mean to go through it all, but there is one quote at the bottom of, if we go to page 3 and the top of page 4, that I'd like you to comment on. Right at the bottom it says, now we are going to work with each other with our different rights, interests, and mandates, and make better decisions and live together despite our differences. And what work we are going to do where, turning over to the next page, and at what scale and at what layer in the interest of the fish and each other were some of the questions that started us off on our focus on governance. But there was also a profound acknowledgement that before you can make progress on improving decisions or policies, there has to be a trust in each other's numbers. Momentum to be built on the point where a separate and independent entity took forum now known as the Monitoring and Compliance Panel, which is where you gentlemen ended up. Now, is that a fair summary of what took place and the key driver in a lot of this?
That's right.
Mr. Masson?
Yeah, that's correct. It's,
Grand Chief Melloway?
Yes, that's right.
That key is the trust in everybody's numbers. May I have this marked as the next exhibit, please?
864.
I rise only to note, I think Mr. Tyzik said at the beginning of his quote, now the document is how.
Oh,
And that very beginning actually sounds like then Chief Justice Lemaire and Delgamuke.
thank you, Mr. Taylor.
You're not going there, Mr. Taylor.
Nor am I. Now, we've spent a fair amount of time talking about the M&C panel and its report, but one question I have to you before a broader question on your experiences in the ISDF is, do you see any relationship between effective catch monitoring and sustainability? Mr. Sackage.
Totally.
What
You
would
can't overharvest, or it's not sustainable. And if you don't know what you've removed out of the water without counting, you wouldn't know that.
Mr. Masson.
Yes, effective catch monitoring is a key component of effective fisheries management and resource management.
Grand Chief Melloway.
Yes, I agree.
Thank you. And as all of you have been involved with the ISDF from the start, in your experience, do you think overall it has been a positive process? Grand Chief Melloway.
Yes, I think it's been a very good process. The more that we work together and the more that we get to know each other, the more easier it is for us to understand each other and where we're coming from. Because we've existed for the past few generations as natural-born enemies, the commercial and the sport and the First Nations and DFO. But we work together quite a bit and have gotten to know each other, and that it helps the process.
Thank you. Mr. Masson.
Yeah, I totally support the comments from Chief Melloway, and only would reiterate that I have observed at the ISDF relationships grow, understanding grow, and a greater ear for really listening what's going on and what the perspectives are.
Mr. Sackage.
Yeah, I'd say the same sort of thing. In fact, it is one of my concerns that, as we've moved forward in things like the monitoring panel and other sort of things, that without the broader forum, because maybe it's not the place for it now, but you have to have it. I believe it should continue, because without the broader forum, when you start drilling down on these other issues, you're going to need more of that broad support from the whole group that everybody talks about.
Well, that goes to my next question. That's fine, we'll continue. It's my understanding that the funding for the ISDF is finished as of March of this year. Do you think that it's beneficial or, in fact, necessary that there be this type of a process continue in the future? Grand Chief Melloway.
Yes, I think that I think it should be the ISDF that should carry on. There's no sense reinventing the wheel. I think that there's a lot of good work that's been done there, and folks have gotten used to going there and working with one another. I think that it should carry on.
Thank you. Mr. Masson.
Yes, I agree. And point of clarification, I mean, funding expires at the end of this fiscal year. Okay, but I am a full supporter of the Monitoring Compliance Panel. I think that it's only really begun to scratch the surface. I think that I have a vision that this group could do a great deal more than we've touched on to date. I think it's a really useful forum for the department and for the resource and for the participants.
Mr. Sackage.
Yes, I think it should continue, and if you look back in history, we're getting closer now to the root of the issue than we ever have before, so there's got to be a reason for that, and it's been basically through that integrated salmon dialogue forum that we've gotten this close.
Thank you. Those are my questions, Mr. Commissioner.
Just a point of clarification, Mr. Tyzak. Mr. Masson, when you were asked about the funding expiration date for the ISDF, do I take it you mean March 31, 2012?
Thank you very much, gentlemen. My name is Don Rosenblum. Excuse me. I appear on behalf of Area D, Gilnet, Area B, Sainer. I'll be very brief. I want to follow up to the latter questions of Council for BC in respect to your expectation or your desire to see your work continuing into the future. Throughout this inquiry, I have focused in part on the issue of fiscal capacity of DFO to fulfill its mandate. Let me commence my brief cross-examination by inviting you to agree, and I assume we've really heard it from all of you already, that catch monitoring is an integral aspect of DFO's mandate, an integral program that is required as part of DFO fulfilling its mandate. Do you agree with that, all of you? I would assume so. It's trite, but is there anyone who would disagree with it? Hearing nothing, I will assume that obviously that is a simple premise that is accepted by the three of you. If that is the case, and respecting the fact that there is an ongoing budget that DFO grapples with yearly in respect to the catch monitoring aspect of its mandate, and I believe there is Exhibit 841 before these proceedings that speaks to the DFO budget, and accepting the fact that there has been funding provided to you for your particular initiative with the Monitoring and Compliance Panel through PICFI, and following up with the Commissioner's comment that the PICFI money, as I understand it, is terminated as of the end of this fiscal year, March 31st, 2011. My question is this. Firstly, how do you anticipate that the funding of your initiative will be carried out April 1st and beyond of next year? And I would direct my question to Mr. Masson and obviously invite the other two panelists at any point to make their contribution. But as Mr. Masson is the conduit to the department, I think it fitting that he answer these questions.
So how do I anticipate the funding will be provided April 1st and beyond? And
I'm sorry, did you say you don't or you do?
I said, I'm just repeating your question.
Yes.
I don't specifically have an answer of where we're going to go in the department in terms of our options. Earlier on we heard the fundamental options are seek new money, reprioritize, and so forth. So given that suite of options, we then start looking in the seek new money part of it, and an initiative like this, with where it's based on a collaborative process, based on supporting an integral part of the department's mandate, as you point out. I'd suggest that it's not always just the Department of Fisheries that might be a funding source. It is the kind of initiative that that may get support from independent foundations. It may get some independent resourcing. We're not talking about the kind of budget that's going to necessarily be out of reach. I think you heard earlier that the M&C panel has operated on approximately $160,000 a year, half of which might have come from the Department of Fisheries in the past. And so, you know, I'd suggest that perhaps there's an opportunity for various sources of funding to try to put something together that would enable this panel to continue to grow. And I also offer that I think it's worthy of departmental consideration in light of the fact of its close relationship to our mandate. We are interested in building support, in working together with the harvesters, and in a management function like catch monitoring, where harvesters' support and contribution is so important to the success of the initiative.